I shifted in the uncomfortable airport seat, anticipating the equally uncomfortable flight home. Suddenly, a man stood before me. I glanced up to find a very tall person. His dark brown eyes stared at me, and then glanced at the empty seat beside me. He seemed to look annoyed as he scratched the scruff of his chin before he spoke.
Is that seat taken?
I didn't understand his question until I realized my bag spilling from my side to the empty seat. It looked rude, especially when the airport being congested and full. No, it's not. I'm sorry, I apologized, removing the bag from my shoulder in favor of keeping it on my lap. I nervously twiddled my fingers. You must think I didn't want anyone sitting next to me. I chuckled, but found that he had his eyes closed, head down, and shoulders crossed. He peeked and glared in my direction.
Look, I
didn't realize you were trying to rest. Sorry, I interrupted. His thick eyebrows shot downward as he scrutinized me with a look before he continued to talk.
Look, I didn't think you were hogging this seat for your bag. I also wasn't resting, just aggravated, so there's no need to apologize.
His deep voice went lower with his last words as his eyes stared at his watch.
This is my third plane, and then finding out that this one is delayed also.
He gave an aggravated sigh. His arm reached to his neck to massage it as I couldn't help peep at his muscular definition. I quickly stared down, trying to hide my flushed cheeks as I bit my lip. I was extremely small compared to his 6-foot height, his long legs extended out, slouching in his seat. Wow, 3 flights? To think I was complaining about the delay for this one, and this is the only flight I've taken. My complaint looked insignificant compared to the day this person probably had.
I just finished a job in Texas, and the one-way flights weren't available until next week. It's important that I get home.
He had a hard expression as he looked in the distance. I wasn't sure if I should pry any further, just when the announcement of boarding played through the intercom near my plane's gate. Well, this is my flight, I told him as he began to rise and nod.
Mine as well,
he gruffly stated, standing behind me as he stood in line, waiting for our turn to give our boarding pass. I entered the plane and found my seat, but happened to have lost the tall gentleman. The flight was bumpy due to the turbulence as the plane seemed to hit every cloud in the sky. Every time I tried to doze off, the plane would dip a bit purposely, waking me. Then the plane would correct itself as if daring me to try to rest again. I gave up sleeping in favor of reading my favorite book. After a few chapters, I didn't realize how invested in the story I was when I heard our flight captain voice in regards to arriving at our destination. I put away my book as we descended, looking at the window, seeing clear skies in the familiar airport of my hometown. I gathered my carry-on, bypassing the conveyor belt with the huge crowd, glad I didn't bring a suitcase. I contacted Uber. I was frustrated that the only one to my county would have to be shared with someone else, while the next available would arrive in an hour. It was to be expected in a small town that I was headed to. I clicked to agree in sharing, walking up to the car, and found a familiar shadow beside me, waiting for the same Uber. We meet again, I said, making him aware of my presence, but instantly embarrassed how simply corny that statement sounded. His eyes studied me a bit, but he didn't seem surprised or even care. He politely opened the door, signaling for me to go in while he slid in after me, closing the door.
It's rare to have people going to Plottersfield. Although, your pretty face is familiar. I'm pretty sure I've given you a ride,
the Uber driver mockingly said. I was used to this old man's annoying small talk. Plottersfield was a hidden gem in my opinion. While others found it boring and a wasted space, I found sanctuary in that depopulated place, then populated cities. I had trouble fitting in. I saw comfort in the paintings I did, and the only time I left my home is if my agent insisted on my presence whenever my art was showcased in a gallery. I remember, because I usually have business a few times a year that has me traveling. The artist, right? The driver asked as he began to drive. I simply nodded, then glimpsing beside me to find the gentleman leaning and looking outside the window. I could see the driver staring at his male passenger, offended at him not acknowledging his presence or contributing to the conversation. He decided to focus on driving instead. I secretly was grateful for his decision. Small talk was a bit of a nuisance after a long, uncomfortable flight, though I was interested more in talking to the stranger. His body language showed his discomfort in having a conversation with others. I resolved myself in continuing to read my book. It would be an hour drive, and I had to occupy my time with something. I guess the turn of the pages caught his attention. I felt the movement in my seat before I heard his serious tone.
What are you reading?
I looked up to find his dark chocolate eyes, inquisitively waiting for my answer. The Eyes of the Dragon, I informed him. My answer seemed to make him a bit uncomfortable as he looked at the book curiously, frowning as if remembering something before he smiled dejectedly, glaring back at the window beside him.
When you can see people doing something, and they don't see you, even the most trivial actions seem important.
You've read it. I couldn't stop the excitement of finding someone who appreciated this book. My happiness deflated when seeing his facial appearance look disinterested. I caressed the edges of the book, all worn out from years of being read.
It was a long time ago,
he whispered.
I don't read much these days.
He decided that his hands were more interesting than talking to me. For some reason, that irritated me. I hardly knew this person and I felt betrayed. I didn't realize how upset I was when an angry sigh escaped my lips in aggravation as I glared at the pages of the book.
You're upset with me.
I heard his words but responded shaking my head in refusal and a polite smile.
You've been angrily staring at the same page for the last 5 minutes,
he shot back, not accepting my white lie. He was staring at me again when I looked up, only a slight smirk on his rugged features. This is the first time seeing him smile other than his default expression of gloom, but it only angered me more. I'm not upset with you, personally. This book was given to me during a dark time in my life. I had lost my parents in a car accident at the age of 12, only to be left with my relatives who were too busy. I discovered the book on my porch steps during my parents' wake. I eventually inherited the home I grew up in when I became an adult. Its medieval fantasy world inspired most of my artwork. He studied me for a while, mulling over my words before he began to speak.
I didn't mean to offend you. I just stopped believing in fairy tales for a long time.
I wanted to shout at him that I wasn't some half-witted little girl who still believed in magic, dragons, or fairy godmothers. Then the abrupt stop caught my attention and the driver notifying us of our arrival. He removed himself out of the car and waited for me to get out before closing the door. He proceeded to wave at the driver. As the car departed, I was surprised to find he didn't go back in the car. He didn't seem surprised with his predicament, as if he was aware we were headed in the same location.
Well, this is where we part ways. Excuse me,
he told me, slinging his carry-on bag behind his shoulders. I was speechless for a moment. He walked to the house that was across the street from mine, in this rural area. He was walking to the home of Crazy Landry's house. I stared at the home that had been vacant for the past week, due to the death of Isabel Landry. Even before her death, the house was an eyesore, in need of painting, shrubbery everywhere, just falling apart with the lack of care. The people in the town, especially children, stood clear of it. I heard him chuckle at my confused expression as he sighed, staring at the unsightly obstruction.
It seems unreal coming home after all these years. Fucking 20 years.
He rubbed the back of his neck as his shoulders slumped a bit, until he realized I was still there, and then decided to straighten himself up. His fist tightened around his bag strap.
Evelyn Taylor.
He said my name in anger. I was a little confused as to what I did to have caused such emotions. I tried not to make sense of it as I backed slowly to my home.
Why couldn't you treat me like the rest of the town? Always so damn nice. If you had acted just like the rest of those fucking pricks at school, I wouldn't be curious about coming back to this piece of shit town.
I tried to wrap my head around who this person was. I didn't remember Mrs. Landry having a... That's when the memories came flooding back to me. A small, malnourished child. The other children making fun of him being scrawny and wearing ragged clothing. A small boy who kept to himself but always caught the attention of the boys at school. I was never part of the bullying, but I might as well have been, associating with people like that. I only found out too late as I grew older that they weren't really my friends. I had distanced myself from them for quite some time. Benjamin Landry? The words came out of my lips like a whisper as I saw his eyes widen at me, remembering his name. He wasn't that unhealthy thin child anymore, but his sorrowful eyes were something that hadn't changed. I could have kicked myself for not seeing it in the first place. I only remembered days after my parents' wake, the commotion outside my house of an ambulance and police. But the images just seemed to be even more confusing as I looked to him for an answer. He remained silent, so I took the initiative to pry the information from him. You disappeared from school. Where did you go? I stood my ground instead of heading back home.
Social services sent me to Texas, where my mother's parents lived. They took care of me most of my life until they passed away 10 years ago. I'm thankful for my time with them.
I was afraid of pursuing any further, but his eyes were staring at me, as if challenging me to ask him whatever I wanted. What happened? He seemed to smile at that question as he shrugged his shoulders.
Crazy Landry was mentally unstable, bipolar, and different phobias that were too much for a child to comprehend at the time. Rules that were placed on me that didn't make sense, but had to abide by them, or Crazy Landry got upset.
He sighed as he shook his head and started to walk away. Wait! Don't go. I'm sorry.
Don't.
He growled out as he turned to glare at me.
I don't need your pity. Why apologize for something a fucked up bitch did? I didn't come to her funeral or to visit her grave. I only came to get her things in order. This fucking shitty home is the only thing she happened to give me, as if mocking me, wanting me to have this house and all the fond memories that come with it.
He sneered, and seeing my gaze seemed to prompt him to stop suddenly.
Well, have a good day, Evelyn. I'm glad that some tales helped to shape your life.
He looked at the book I clutched before grabbing his bag to walk towards his home. As he walked away, something in his last sentence kept replaying in my mind. Tales? I opened my book and stared at the crayon initials, BL, that I fondly caressed each time I read from the beginning. Benjamin! I hollered out as I ran across the street, leaving my belongings on the sidewalk pavement in front of my house. Ben was trying to open the door with the key that was hidden under the mat. He turned, taken aback by my presence in front of his house. He hesitated in opening the door, instead turned to give me his full attention. You broke a rule to give this to me, didn't you? His large frame started to fidget, which seemed odd for a muscular man like himself to be so afraid. I opened the book, pointing to the initials he had written so long ago. He squinted to look and chuckled. He flushed, embarrassed at being caught.
Rule number 1. Always stay at home after school. It didn't matter if the house was on fire.
He crossed his arms and leaned back.
You were always nice to me at school, even if you hanged with assholes. You just lost your parents, and I wanted to give you the only thing I had. The story of a prince held captive from an evil magician for being falsely accused. Knowing that he escapes at the end always encouraged me through tough times.
So, in order for you to give me this, you were hurt very badly, though. I couldn't help but cry, clutching the dear book in my hand, knowing he suffered from pure intentions.
I said not to give me your pity. Besides, making you happy caused me to escape my prison for good.
I looked at Benjamin. It was true that he was healthy, had grandparents who had loved him, and he seemed to be okay. In a way, he was right. I nodded in agreement as he grinned, satisfied that I accepted. Well, would you like to visit for tea while you're here? He gave me a warm smile, then proceeded to answer me.
I would like that very much.